Jambo, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Cross-Pollinating Justice, where DEI experts from adults to kids talk and try to share best practices with each other. I am incredibly excited today to welcome Jeff Schoep. Jeff is an internationally renowned public speaker, peace builder, and educator. He often serves as the speaker and consultant for the prestigious human rights champions at the Simon Wiesenthal Center and the Museum of Tolerance. Additionally, he is the founder and president of Beyond Barriers, a 501c3 nonprofit which assists people in exiting extremist groups, cults, and gangs. Beyond Barriers also provides outreach to communities affected by racism and hate. In the past, Jeff was known as the notorious national leader of the largest neo-Nazi organization in the United States. Through interpersonal relationships with those he once vilified, his life changed forever. In early 2019, Jeff broke free from the chains of hate and publicly denounced racism. Jeff, I'm so happy to have you here today.
It's an honor to be here, Misha.
Great. So, Jeff, as you know, we sort of talk to parents and teachers trying to come up with strategies for raising kids who are going to change the future and who will be forces for positive change and good in the future. So I'm hoping you can tell us some of your story, how you got to be from where you were to where you are today.
Yes, of course. So I grew up in rural Minnesota, and I came from a working class, middle class family, and I wasn't taught racism or hate or anything like that growing up. But so the connection to how I got involved in neo-Nazism was my grandfather had fought in the German army during World War II, and my great uncles did as well. My family was from my mom's side of the family was from Prussia, and they were displaced after World War II. And I knew of that history growing up, so I had this fascination starting in the fourth grade, with my grandfather, with his history and all that. And it wasn't something that he propagandized me with or anything like that either. It was something I sought out on my own. So my journey in is a little different than a lot of other people, but the end result was the same. Getting involved in something. So as I mentioned, I wasn't being taught this stuff growing up, but when I joined at 18, when I joined the movement, the National Socialist Movement specifically, now I'm being propagandized. I'm learning hate, anti-Semitism, all this sort of thing. So in the mindset of people that are joining this stuff, they think they're doing something good and noble. Like if we look at it from the outside looking in, like everybody from the outside looking in would see it, they would go, you must know you're doing something wrong, that it's evil, that it's hateful, that it's hurting people and this sort of thing. To the people that are involved in it, the vast majority of them think they're doing something good and noble and positive. And I was of that mindset. I'm thinking, I'm a patriot. I'm serving my country. I'm going to stand up for my people. That was the mindset. It's the wrong mindset. It's not accurate. It's not true. But that's, like when you hear people say, well, that's my truth. That was my truth. Like I believed it wholeheartedly. So I joined this organization, rose up through the ranks, and ended up rather quickly becoming the national leader. Within a couple of years, I was appointed to run that organization. It was an organization that was the continuation of George Lincoln Rockwell's original American Nazi Party back from the 1950s. So it was a very old organization. It's quite small at the time, and unfortunately and regrettably, I built it up to the largest group of its kind in the country. I was there for 25 years leading it, and then I left in 2019. So that's the very ugly part of my story, Misha, but I can explain the more positive parts.
Yes, please. And we are definitely going to get to the more positive parts. I'm wanting to rewind a little bit, though, to when you were first getting involved. Did your parents know? Did your grandfather know? And if they did, how did they react to you being involved in this?
It wasn't, my parents couldn't really control me, I guess you could say. I wasn't a bad kid, but when I got it to be about 16, like a lot of kids, I was real rebellious, and I was seeking out this group and getting involved. And I was out of the home by 16. I was
Okay.
on my own by 16. So my parents really, because they couldn't handle me at home. So I wasn't going to school. I did end up
Okay.
graduating and finishing school and everything. But at the time I was just like, school was too easy for me and it was boring. So I just didn't
Hmm.
go, I was just
Yeah.
not going. And then I had to finish up. I did manage to graduate, before the rest of my class did, because I went to one of those alternative schools where you could go at your own pace, which worked great for me. And I graduated a couple months before everybody else, which I was real proud of at the time. Then I joined the movement, got involved, and I tell you what, how it affected my family was unbelievable. I think this is something that a lot of people don't, we know what hate does to society, but a lot of times we don't think about what it does to the families of people that are involved. So it's like it became like a train wreck that just, or a downhill snowball that just kept spiraling and spiraling. So I'm involved early on in the mid 90s, early 90s. I was doxxed before doxing was even a word. I think I was doxxed on a radio program. I was operating, my last name isn't real common, so I was operating under the name Jeff Stevens. And I don't know how the radio show host necessarily figured this out, but she knew my name somehow. And during the program, doxed my name on the program and said, "We're going to call your mother at work on the program." And I'm just like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? At the time, I was a musician. I was a singer in a band. That was my life's ambition. That's what I really wanted to do with my life. And politics was sort of like a side piece, I guess you could say. And what happened when that took place, and I was doxxed on the air, I didn't know what to say. So I'm saying, my parents don't love me. They hate me. They've ostracized me because I'm trying to protect them. Like I'm 19, I think, at the time, and I'm trying to think like, what am I going to do? Holy cow, this is going to affect my family. And so I'm saying that they hate, and I'm lying. And it's like, I was brought up not to lie. So now I'm feeling even more like a piece of garbage because I'm lying to protect my family. Of course they love me, and they didn't agree with what I did. My mom was, fairly liberal, moderately liberal, so it broke her heart what I was involved in. And now she's being doxxed on the air. They lived in a little tiny town in rural Minnesota, so everybody's knowing. And the callers were, saying to this lady, like, this is wrong, you shouldn't do that. And she's like sparring with her callers and just getting more mad. And I'm on the inside, I'm just like shattered. And after that, I felt like because of that doxing, and I didn't process this until literally after I got out of the movement, in 2019. And I went through what I call the decompression process. But I'm thinking back to that moment. Like, after that happened, I quit my band. I had long hair at the time, because I was imagine this, I like Poison or Motley Crue with the long hair. That was me, right? Horns up. And, so I had tucked up and all that. And I cut my hair, and then I was like, that's it. I have to leave the band because I'll ruin their chances at making it now. And what that did, when I say a snowball effect, or what kept happening, my mother was an attorney. She had come over here from Germany. She was first generation, so my mother was an immigrant. And which is ironic, considering I spoke out for years against immigration, and well, mostly illegal immigration. But this whole thing, and now I'm quitting the band because I didn't want to drag them down. My mother's career got harmed. So she's an attorney. Her dream was to become a judge. She ran for office, became or was elected to be a judge. And this is the way she explained it to me back in the 90s. She said she had gotten a call from the governor of the state, and governor had to sign off. It was like a formality, sign off on all the new judges that were appointed, which is pretty much, like I said, formality. And he said, Mrs. Schoep, your father, and I don't know how he knew this either, but he says, your father fought in the German army during the war. Your son's a leader in the Nazi party. I don't feel you're fit to be a judge in this state, and I'm not going to sign your judgeship. So my involvement in this stuff, like, destroyed my mother's career. After that, she didn't talk to me hardly for, like, I don't know how long. It felt like forever because I was pretty close with her. I think it was maybe a couple years, but she barely spoke to me after that. And I tell you what, Misha, like, and I'm not, I take accountability and I take put the blame on myself, you know. But what that did to me psychologically when all that happened was it radicalized me 1,000 times more than I was in the first place. Like I was still of that kind of tender age where maybe I wasn't sure in what I was doing. After that happened, I was like, okay, the world is out to get me. The government is out to get me. They're punishing my family who doesn't even agree with anything I'm doing. And I tried to shelter by using a fake name, and now they're being punished. It made me so angry, and it just like increased my radicalization. And back at that point in my life, I was pretty radical, a lot more radical than in later years. I was less radical, but at that point I was about as radical as you could get.
I hear that. It sounds like you were very isolated, right? Like each of these steps just isolated you more and more and sort of funneled you into this movement. Do you think that that's part of what happened?
For sure, it's like when you're in these groups, it becomes like an echo chamber, and it's a lot like a cult. I compare back then, and all these years, I wouldn't have compared it to a cult. Girls I was dating would say, Jeff, you're like a cult leader. You're in a cult. And I'm thinking, what's wrong with these girls that I'm dating? Why am I making these bad choices? But it was me. There was something wrong with, it was me that was making these bad choices. But again, once you're radicalized and you're in that echo chamber, you don't see what everybody else sees. You see it differently, and you become very isolated. I was lucky in the sense that my family didn't completely cut me off. A lot of other families and people that I knew, either they cut their family off or vice versa. And
Mhm.
for most of the people that are in it become very, very isolated. So everything you're taking in is part of the group. They had their own bands and music and all this kind of stuff and entertainment and all that. So everything you're taking in is part of that indoctrination. So it is very, very much like a cult. I know it's not a term that a lot of people use for it, but it's about the closest you can get to how they operate. And you're very, very isolated. So now this is your new family basically.
Mhm.
And that also complicates breaking away from it and getting away from it for a lot of people. Even if they start to have doubts and things like that, they're like, well, this is all I know. And I was sort of the mindset, that old saying, like, well, now this is your bed, now you have to lie in it.
Okay, yep.
That
So you were
was,
punishing yourself.
I guess, I mean, looking back now, I kind of feel like that in a way. I just felt like I didn't have any other options. Like, it was like my dream was to do music, but now I have to do this because I can't drag the band down and stuff like that. And the band was even understanding. They were like, don't worry about it. You can do both, even though they weren't into my politics either. But I was like, no, I'm going to ruin your guys' opportunity. And that's how I felt. Like, I'm going to just, everybody around me is being um harmed by this. So and one would think, like, wouldn't that make you reevaluate what you're doing and walk away? But for me, it was sort of like, well, this is now who I'm branded for the rest of my life. I might as well. And I tell you what, when I walked away from it and I stopped talking to everybody, I still was talking to just a couple of people because I had corporate responsibilities from the group and things like that I had to wrap up as I was leaving.
Mhm.
And a couple of people, or the one friend that I had for like 20 years was telling me, he's like, Jeff, the world is not going to see you as anything. I never shared a word of this to him. I'm just leaving, and he's worried, and he's like, the world's not going to see you as anything else but the Nazi leader you've been for the last 25 years. I'm worried about you. What are you going to do? What are you going to do with your life? How are you going to survive? What are you going to do? You had an army behind you, and now you're alone. You're going to be
Right.
alone. And it was like, don't worry about it. I'm fine, but on the inside, it was like, those are some of the fears and concerns I had as well, and I knew I wanted to speak out and do something um, honorable and truly noble. But I didn't know exactly how that looked. I just knew I wanted to do something in peace building after the life that I led. And that led to the good work I'm doing now.
Right, right. And we're definitely going to get to that good work. I did want to ask, what do you think made you at that time, instead of going whole hog into music or some other sort of pastime or hobby, what do you think drove you to to the white nationalist movement as opposed to some other all-encompassing hobby?
You mean like why did I choose that path specifically?
Right, right. As opposed, because you were a musician, so you could have gone just full on, I'm a musician, this is what I do. I eat, drink, and sleep music. So what made you say, well, I do love music and I want to be a musician, but this thing is even more important, if that was even your thought process?
Well, for me, music was the most important, but politics was the side piece. But when that doxing incident happened, then I
Okay.
felt like I no longer have a choice, is the way I felt about it. Because I felt like even if I like stop and knowing what I know now, like I probably could have stopped. I probably could have just said, you know what, this is enough and walked away from it. But at the time, I felt like my name is out there. This is just like, I was saying about when I was leaving in the early time, I felt like now that my name is exposed, I'll never be seen as anything else. And that's at like 19. So it was
Right,
like, that's really kind of, I mean, it's sad, but at the same time, it's like, I made that bad choice. I
right.
take, take accountability for it.
But all or nothing thinking is pretty common, right? And particularly when you're that young, your brain isn't even fully developed, and you just think this is my only option. So I think that's really good for parents and teachers to hear that you've got to maybe stay in communication with your kids so they'll know that this one thing that has impacted you does not have to impact the rest of your life.
Well said. Well said. And that's so true. And if we put ourselves back into our teenage minds and how we were, like and you have kids, I have kids, it's like, and they could come home from school one day and be like, the world is ending because,
Yes.
she said this to me or he said this to me, and you're going, oh man, like
You're not going to remember this in 10 months, in 4
right.
months. Yes.
So I think you're right. That is so important. And I think even in the work that I do now, I deal with young people that feel literally it's a very similar story with a young man that I was working with, and he was in his early 20s and he wanted to go into law enforcement, and he had been in the movement for like 3 months and left like almost immediately, and he got doxxed after he left because a membership list from the group he was in got leaked or something. Excuse me. And he felt the same way. So I was like, man, I got to help this kid, because he's like, my life is over. I can't do what my dream was. My whole family's in law enforcement. I can't do it now. And I'm like, don't think that way, please. Let me tell you. And then I shared some of my background, and I was like, look, you can change. And it's not like you've been doing it for 20 years. I might feel like that now, but so that's really important, I think, for parents to help their youth and address that if they're going through it, and important for youth as well to remember that even if you think like it feels like your life's going to be over, it'll get better and things will improve, and you don't have to feel like you're locked into something, because then you can go down a path like I did. I'm very fortunate to be alive and even be here today to talk about this stuff.
Mhm.
A lot of people didn't make it that far.
Wow. That's really interesting too, because when you said he had been in the movement and then wanted to be in law enforcement, my mind sort of went, huh,
Right.
he's gonna have a gun on the streets. How would you suggest that I think about that instead? Because I'm putting him in a pigeonhole too, right? Because
Right.
of something that he did, and maybe he doesn't believe that anymore. But so how would you suggest that I reframe that in my head?
Well, in this particular case, and I think it's different with everybody, because I think that is a I feel your concerns 100%. I get it, especially with some of the terrible incidents that have taken place and stuff. But in this kid's case, he thought he was joining a patriotic group, because they kind of were, I want to say, kind of like masked their like fascism type of thing as one of those type of organizations that I don't name the groups because I don't want to give them any publicity or attention. But we could use our imagination on what kind of group. But it was one of those kind of groups, and he was like, I thought I was, I'm a patriotic American. I was joining this group. And then when I realized they were fascist, I was like, no, this isn't what I signed up for. I don't want to be part of it. And he was in and out like really quickly. So that's kind of a little quite a bit different than my scenario, but the career choice thing is what I was thinking of. But
Right.
Does that put a little more context in
It
it?
definitely does. It definitely does. Because, I mean, I think when we ask for the benefit of the doubt for ourselves and for people who look like us, we also have to be willing to give the benefit of the doubt to other people, as hard as that may seem, particularly because, they're walking around with a legal gun
Right.
and can hurt folks. But okay, now I want to get to how did you get out? And I want to also have you speak on you got out in 2019, which means you pretty soon entered a really isolating pandemic. So how was that for you too, having left what was your family for over 20 years?
Ooh, which part do you want first?
Okay, well, tell us how you got out and then tell us how it was in the pandemic.
Okay. So getting out of that life, I was there's a word I'm looking for, but like I had assumed that I'd be doing it for the rest of my life. I would be involved in that forever. And I had met with there was a whole lot of factors that went into play here, but the biggest factor and the first person that planted a seed was a African American man by the name of Daryl Davis. And for those in the audience that don't know Daryl, he's a world famous musician. He played with Elvis Presley, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, all these great blues and rock and roll guys. And I was and what Daryl does in his spare time, or a lot of times in the press, they'll say it was his hobby, is he helps get people out of white supremacist groups. So Daryl's helped over 200 people leave the Ku Klux Klan as African American. I mean, it's just mind blowing, right? And he's like a brother to me today. He's like family. But I didn't know that I was meeting Daryl. Of course, we in the movement, who these folks are, especially someone as well known as Daryl. So I would have probably I was contacted by this about a film company, and they said, we'd like to interview you for this film, which was something I did quite often when I was in the movement. And it sounded good, so I said, sure, I'll show up, I'll be there. And typically I would do due diligence. I would look into the background, make sure it wasn't some kind of setup, see what the show was about. But it just sounded interesting, and for whatever reason, fate, destiny, laziness, I don't know what it was. It was really strange that I didn't look into it. I just said, sure, I'll come. And this sounds good. And I went down there, and I'm sitting outside this place where Hank Williams used to play. It's called Chris's Hot Dogs. It was in Alabama, I think. Alabama or Mississippi, somewhere down south. And I'm sitting out there with my girl, and this big black man walks up to me and puts out his hand and says, hi, I'm Daryl Davis. You must be Jeff. And I'm like, yes, nice to meet you. And we shook hands, and we got to go inside and film. I'm thinking to myself, I know this guy's face. I know that name, but from where? And I didn't get it right off the bat. And we were about to sit down. It clicked. I was like, Daryl Davis is the guy that gets people out of these groups, So I'm thinking I'm gonna,
No.
oh no, right? Yes. So I'm thinking I'm going to spar off with him, but Daryl and I are getting along way too well, and we're in this place with music. We're talking about music and going back and forth with music and having this great conversation. And then I'm like realizing, hey, Jeff, like a little voice tap you on the shoulder. You're on camera and you're the head of the National Socialist Movement. This isn't your buddy. Like
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
So all of a sudden, and Daryl will explain this in talks, like he'll say, well, Jeff slipped into movement mode for a moment, because then I
Mhm.
was like, I'll fight to the last bullet for my people. And I'm just getting kind of agitated towards him, trying to get him worked up. Daryl doesn't react. His face is the same as it was, and he's just like, okay, and just continues the line of a conversation. And now I'm sitting back and I'm like, wow, this guy's really intriguing. He's really interesting. And he didn't react. How is this happening? Because normally I would get a reaction if I did that with somebody, and he's not reacting.
Mhm.
And then we go into a little bit deeper into the conversation, and conversations are reciprocal, and they go back and forth,
Yeah.
and respect is shown, respect is given. And he was very respectful and kind and thoughtful. And he says, you want to know why I do the work that I do? And I said, yeah, of course. And he said, he told me a story about when he was in the Boy Scouts at like 11, 12 years old. He was the only black child in the parade, and in the Boy Scout parade, and he was being pelted with rocks by white adults. And that story, just hearing that, and he wasn't Daryl's not like a really overly emotional person, so he's not really showing it, but I could still feel it. And it bothered me a lot. So I'm thinking, in my mind, I'm going, well, at least that wasn't my group, or at least that wasn't me. I wouldn't do something like that to a child. And I'm trying to distance myself and my mind
Mhm.
from it, but I'm hearing that, and it really bothered me, because now all of a sudden this noble concept, this noble ideal that I think I'm fighting for doesn't look so freaking noble anymore. It looks pretty ugly when it's doing that. Because I'm thinking Daryl's one person. If that happened to Daryl, how many other people has that happened to? And now, of course, I understand that a lot better, but I was still learning that at the time. I mean, it was new to me at the time, I should say, and it hurt. It bothered me. So I'm trying to distance myself from that and hearing that. And so Daryl's a lot like Johnny Appleseed, and he planted the first seeds. And
Mm.
my family, Mija, they tried everything. Even my grandfather that fought in the war, he says, Jeff, this is gonna lead you to death or prison. And I was like, you might have given up, but I'll never stop fighting. And
Yeah.
and he just looked at me and he was like, I'm not talking to you about this anymore. And it was like I was never disrespectful to him until that moment. And so my family tried everything. They tried sending me away to everything you could imagine, and nothing worked. But what Daryl planted, that seed, that started the wheels of change. And living here in Detroit, where I'm at now, I moved here in 2007. The community, dealing with people in Detroit, white people are the minority here, so
Mhm.
I couldn't avoid other people. And I'm finding out, hey, everybody's just, we're all alike. We have more in common than we do in differences. And this is something I found with Daryl. And also, he's so perceptive. Like, the girl I was with at the time was ultra jealous. And he had a question because he had read something on the internet about another girl that I was with or something. So he was like, can I talk to you over here? This is off camera now, afterwards. And
Mhm.
we're in like the back part of the restaurant. And he goes, there was this girl that I'd read something online, or I'd heard through the grapevine about this. He goes, I don't think this is the same girl. And she looks kind of like she might get a little angry if I would ask that question. So I wanted to ask you over here. It's not on camera or anything, just,
Mhm. Mhm.
just because I'm curious. And I was like, my gosh, he could have gotten me, and I might not have made it home. Ask that question.
Right.
So he's so perceptive.
Right.
It was
Uh-huh.
just like, I really, really like this guy. He's so
Mhm.
thoughtful and so perceptive. And like I said, like, we're brothers now, but it's
Mhm.
just like that changed my life. But that was in 2016. It took time. Like, I
Right.
was de-radicalizing while I was still involved, which is the opposite way you should do it. You should disengage, then de-radicalize. But my journey was a little backwards, so I was de-radicalizing while I was still in.
I mean, you were the leader. How did you extricate yourself? And did you lose all of your friends? Did you lose all of your supports? Was your family there, when you finally did leave? Like what was that like?
Oh, it was. I'd done a lot of hard things in my life, but that had to be the hardest. That was absolutely the hardest. My business and career was wrapped up in what I was doing, because I was selling music, and I was running the record label. That was my source of income. So leaving, also, I had to think about, now I got to dump my business. I got to give this up too. And that was a little bit of a, I guess you could say, a selfish thing. But I had to think about that, and then losing everybody that and everybody around you. My mom was going through cancer around that time. I was thinking about leaving for a while, but I couldn't get myself to break free of it. There was all different reasons to stay. I was sued in a lawsuit, and it was like, I'm going to stay and continue fighting this because my lawyer was being paid by the movement. That was one thing. Another thing, oh, this is my job. How am I going to leave my job? Who's going to hire me? That was another thing. All kinds of little things like that played a role in it. And I kept making excuses like, I'm just going to stay. Then I'm trying to make changes in the group, saying it's a white civil rights organization. Like, I know how ridiculous it sounds now.
Yeah.
I promise I'm not a fool, but I thought that I was convincing myself and trying to convince the world that it was. And eventually, I'm going through the motions and I'm like, I can't do this. This is not a white civil rights organization. I'm putting lipstick on a pig, the pig being the movement. And it's
Mhm.
like, I can't fix this. It's broken, like, I mean, I think as a guy, I just like felt like maybe I can fix this. I can do this. And then I'm thinking like, what if another thing was, well, what if I leave? Because I felt like in a lot of ways I was the pressure valve. Like there was people that would come and say, we should go do this illegal things, like crazy stuff. And I'm like, well, what if I leave and I don't have that under control anymore? I don't have, I'm not able to control that. What if people go out and hurt somebody? And I had to kind of just take a chance and just say, you know what? I'm done. I'm walking away from this. Things are going to work out. I'll figure it out as I go. And that's what I did. And Daryl was one of the first people that reached out to me when it was in the press and everything that I had left. The first thing he said is, "How can I help? Is there anything I can help? I don't know what all happened or how you left. The only thing I'm reading about is in the papers. Or I just want to help." And I was like, "Man, this my God," I felt like having a breakdown right there on the phone because it was
Mhm.
like, oh, even talking about it. But it was so difficult because once you start speaking out too, I knew that the threats were going to come in and all that kind of stuff. And then not having that mission, I'd had that mission for all those years, and it's like, um you can't just snap your fingers and go, oh, I'm going to go into peace building now, no problem, I'm done. And I kind of thought that maybe it would work like that, but it doesn't. I had to decompress. I call it decompression period, and really do a lot of self work. And some people it takes years and years and years. Some people it's faster. I was in a high stress environment for a very, very long time, so I tend to process things a little faster.
Mhm.
Um, but that period before I started working in peace building and speaking out and denouncing my past and racism and all that period, that decompression period, was the hardest period of my life. It felt, it was so lonely and so tough. But I say that with a caveat, like it shouldn't make anybody. I don't want people to use that as an excuse not to be better or better themselves, because it you feel so much better afterwards. It's like a giant weight is lifted off your back, to know that you're doing something right and that you're doing something good and noble, and you're not causing harm to others. It was worth every bit of stress and tribulation and all that. And I'm just thankful to be able to do something that
Yeah.
helps humanity now.
So how did you get on with the Simon Wiesenthal Theater Center and Beyond Barriers? How did all that come out of this period of decompression and reevaluation?
So when I was going through the decompression period, and I felt like I was ready to speak out at which I think was in August or September of 2019. A reporter had reached out to me or something, and I felt like I was right. I was ready, but I hadn't said anything yet. And a reporter called me for a question on something, and asking about the movement. I said, I'm out of the movement, right? No, I didn't know that. Tell me. And I thought, this is the time. Now it's time.
Mhm.
So then I made that announcement, and launched a website, jeffschoep.com. And at within a couple days, I think, of that website launching, I got a email from the Simon Wiesenthal Center, which in the movement, that's a scary group, because they were involved in hunting down old Nazi war criminals and things like that. So
They sure were.
right. So
Mhm,
so
mhm.
I was like, uh-oh, I know who these guys are, but why do they want to meet with me? And I'm thinking, so a little bit in the back of my head, I was a little nervous to go meet with them, but I said, you know what, I want to do this because I want to do something right, and this may be a chance to do that. Let me go talk with them. And within 2 days, Rick Eaton, their head of research at their department, who had been there like 35 years, he had came out, flew out to Detroit to meet me. And he said basically I was the highest level former white supremacist or former neo-Nazi in the United States that's ever left, and denounce the movement. So they were on it. And the Simon Wiesenthal Center changed my life. I mean, they taught me so much about compassion. They run the Museum of Tolerance, the mobile museums of tolerance now. And introduced me to the Jewish community, which was the community that I vilified the most. I would even say towards the end of my time in the movement that I had let go of most of the racism, but
Mhm, mhm,
anti-Semitism, oh no, I was a raging anti-Semite. So this was the community that I vilified the most and literally blamed for everything.
mhm.
And here they are embracing me and treating me like a human being. And it was a lot to process, Mija. I mean, when I first went and spoke at a synagogue, I got more hugs there than probably any place I've ever been in one day in my life. It was so incredible, and I was so nervous. I thought, man, if I was these folks, if I was these people, I would not want to hear a word Jeff Schoep was saying. I would want to maybe throw rocks at him or something, like I would
Mhm.
not, uh, you know, and I was shown that compassion and that kindness and that love. And it was just, it a former extremist that had invited me to come along there. He asked me afterwards, he says, how do you feel? And I said, I feel good. I think I feel good, because everybody was so wonderful and nice. And he goes, well, what else do you feel? And I'm struggling to explain this, and I was like, I also feel bad, And he's like, what do you feel bad about? And I said, who the person I was. Like, here's a community that I vilified so much, and I just didn't really understand them. I didn't really know them. And he was like, that's it. He goes, that's the same exact thing I felt when I
Mhm.
first spoke at a synagogue. So, and then we had brought two other individuals that were from my old organization that had left as well. And actually a good thing to share as well. When I left, because you did ask that, when I left, I took a lot of people with me. Now that organization, it was the largest party of its kind in the United States. Now it's quite small. I took a lot of the talent, came and left with me, and others left afterwards. And now the organization's quite small, which is great. But now there's other organizations that have risen up,
Mhm.
but a lot of people did leave, and since then I've helped people that have been in the movement, some of them since the 1970s, even way longer than me. So
Mhm.
there's a possibility of change, and I think it's important to keep those doors open, that people can change.
What helps people to change? Is it, meeting your Daryl Davis? Is it finding out that Jeff Scoop left? What is it that helps people to decide, I don't want to do this anymore?
It can be many things. I mean, for some of the people, like some of them that left said, well, we're leaving because you left, we weren't really believing this so much, but we stayed on because we're your friends, or things like that, or it's not the same anymore. And sometimes it was little things that would start that change. Sometimes it was meeting somebody like Daryl Davis. Another individual that comes to mind right now, that I had known many, many years, and he was in the Klan back in the 70s. And when I met him somewhere in the 2000s, he ended up joining my organization. He had left, and the movement in a lot of ways is a revolving door, so people are always coming and going. And this guy had been with us for a number of years, and then he just disappeared, and I didn't know why. He didn't say anything, and he contacted me after seeing the website and said, I love the work that you're doing now, and I want you to know I'm out of the movement too. And he kept trying to convince me, and I'm like, brother, I know you. If you tell me you're out, you don't have to convince me. But I said, I am going to ask you some questions, and I said I wanted to know why. This is a man that brought his whole family into the movement, his kids and everything, and his son had committed suicide. And his son had some addiction problems and things like that, which I don't feel like maybe was in his control, but he felt like, had he not brought him into the movement, that wouldn't have happened. And I mean, everybody knows their family the best, but he blamed himself for his son's death. And that was the catalyst. And he is out of the life, and really, really damaged by that, as I'm sure you can imagine. It was tough. So And for others, it's a little bit more positive story. And I can name this person because he's on our team at Beyond Barriers, but Duke Schneider, who was my chief of security for quite a long time. His father was actually in the German SS during the war, and he was in like a lifetime too, and like as chief of security, and he was a semi-pro wrestler. They called him the Pit Bull because he's just big guy, short but like bricks. And
Yes.
he left a number of years before I did, and we're still very close today as well. And there had been he had fell in love with the African American woman, and that was it. That was the catalyst.
Wow.
Yes, they're married, and when if you meet that, if you ever had a chance to meet them, you think they were high school sweethearts, like the way they carry on and stuff.
Mhm.
They're so like probably one of the best relationships that I've ever seen in my life. They're just
Wow.
incredible people. I love them.
Wow, that is really incredible. Now, I do want to ask you, we have this election, coming up, and a lot of people I talk to are afraid that there's going to be violence. And I remember you saying earlier in our conversation when you were talking to Daryl, you said, "We'll fight to the last bullet." And a lot of people are afraid that there is going to be fighting. Like, what do you think of what you know? If Kamala and Tim Walz do win, what do you think might happen?
It's really hard to judge that, because I hope that there's no violence from, it doesn't matter who wins, like
Mhm.
people have their choice, whoever they want to vote for. And whoever wins, I think people just need to accept that that's the way it is, and not go into violence. I think there's always a risk of violence, no matter which one side wins, the other side's upset. And if you have people that take things to the extremes, that's something that I think law enforcement needs to stay on top of, and monitor and things like that, especially if there's chatter online or in different places where that kind of rhetoric is going around. But I do think it's kind of, I feel like we're in a very hyper polarized time, and
Definitely.
a lot of people say that to me when I left the movement. They said, well, a lot of the stuff that you predicted when you were in, it seems to be the society's tearing at each other now, because years ago, I would say things in the movement like Democrats and Republicans are the same party, just flip a coin.
Yeah.
There's not much difference. And now it is quite different. There's quite a divide there.
Mhm.
And people are so angry. And I think the press has something to blame for that, I think. Um, but they're so angry. Like, we all probably know people, most of us know somebody that's like, well, if you voted for uh one candidate or voted for the other, I'm not talking to you. And it's like,
Yeah.
to me, that's just mind-boggling. Like, in our household growing up, my mom was Democrat, my dad was Republican, and that was okay. It was just like, it is what it is, and now it's like people will cut off their brothers and sisters and moms and dads and grandparents because they voted for Trump or Biden or Kamala or whoever, and
Mhm.
it's like, my gosh, sit down at the table and have a conversation. You don't have to talk politics,
Right.
like, we got to
Hmm.
see the humanity in one another, even if we disagree on things like that, because that's America. We're going to disagree on things, but see the humanity in one another. I mean,
That's right. I completely agree with that. So, what advice would you have for parents? And I'm going to say specifically white parents, but we are finding that in Gen Z, it's not just white boys that are going into these extremist organizations. It's also boys of color. So, what should white parents, or say all parents, be looking for in their, specifically boys, but it can happen to girls as well? What signals should they be looking for? What strategies can they employ to try to turn their kids on a different path if they see them going down the wrong way?
if you don't mind, I'm going to put in a plug for, I just got back from Alabama, and I presented a unit of a curriculum for the
Yes.
Office of Juvenile Justice, and it is specifically for this type of thing.
Yes, please.
Yes, so I'll send you a link afterwards, so you can read it too, because the whole link is now available. I didn't know that until because we presented it in Alabama this week. I just got home, and at a combating hate conference by the Bureau of Justice Assistance Programs.
Great.
And this is a program that educators can specifically use, parents, youth groups, youth mentors, and it talks about the ways we can show parents and youth to use their critical thinking skills to look up things online. They talk about disinformation, misinformation, malinformation, the differences, and how to find this stuff online and to work through it, because our youth are being bombarded with stuff on social media that might not even have anything to do with real media or real news, but it's like influencers and these different things, and they're getting all their news from there. So like, let's, this gives them the ability and the skills to fact check stuff and to show them how to use those critical thinking skills to get into that. So that's one important and that the government is actually backing this, like, I mean, to me, that's just awesome. That's something that I'll send you, and maybe viewers can check it out and or utilize it with their youth groups or in their schools and things like that, because it's an official curriculum that we want everybody to use, and that's one aspect. The other thing, method that I use specifically is something that I had learned from Daryl Davis and another individual, a Muslim lady, Dia Khan, had a similar approach to what Daryl did with me. And I'd met her a little bit after Daryl, but it's a process that we call relational dialogue. And it's having conversations, facilitating conversations with people like Daryl did with me, or like Dia did with me, where they weren't casting judgment. They weren't telling me that I was wrong. And even though I was very, very wrong, when you do that with somebody, and it's not just for extremists, but I mean, if it works on extremists, it's going to work in all aspects of life. So anywhere where people are arguing or divisive or fighting, this is a very helpful tool to be able to use. And it's fostering conversations. You don't tell somebody they're wrong. You try to show them how they're wrong, like have them question things. And one thing that like Dia did with me, and I'll just use this as an example for people, like we were talking about my politics, and we were in this old abandoned building in Detroit. And she says, well, you're talking about the economy, Jeff, and you're speaking about all this, but how come you're just talking for white people when this is an issue that affects all people, doesn't it? And I'm thinking at the time, I'm like, I'm not going to back down, so I just spewed out some movement propaganda at the time or something. Well, later that night, I'm at home, I can't sleep. It's going through my head over and over and over again, like a hamster on a wheel. Jeff, why couldn't you answer that lady? Why couldn't you answer that lady? Why, you're supposed to be the head of the movement. You're supposed to have answers. Why didn't you have an answer? And it was eating away at me. Like, why didn't I have an answer for that? It's because I was wrong. I was
Yeah.
wrong, and she was right. So it even though I wasn't gonna, and most people won't admit it in an argument because nobody wants to lose the argument, right?
Of
But if
course.
you gently put things out there like that, you can reshape the way someone thinks, and by framing things differently and not being aggressive or things like that. Or there's another example that I use from QAnon, which is like a conspiracy theory type thing. There was I can share it if you want, or we can, it's up to you.
Yes, share it,
Okay.
please.
Okay. This was one that came out last time when Trump was president. Somebody in QAnon had said something about that Kennedy was going to come back, JFK was going to come back from the dead and help President Trump.
I heard this one. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And the natural reaction to that is you're thinking, oh my gosh, like what kind of insanity is this? How you come back from being dead all these years later, and then it doesn't make sense, so you want to laugh about it. But if you laugh at somebody that believes that, they're just going to buckle down.
Right. They're going to dig in more.
So the way to frame something like that is, you would go, oh, well, that's interesting. How could you tell me, like, how does that work? Wasn't he shot? could you explain that? And try not to laugh, when you're doing it, like
Right.
keep a straight face like Daryl did, and then just ask, and then they may, spew out whatever, but if they're a thinking person, it'll bother them later, and maybe they'll think through it and they'll go, you know what, this isn't for me. It doesn't make sense. That's a really weird thing to think, and maybe some of the other stuff doesn't make sense either, and they start questioning things. So it's easier to just accept it. But if you're a thinking person, that's gonna get stuff like that. I feel like it gets through. Sometimes it takes a while though.
That's really good. Relational dialogue is what the process is called.
That's what we call it. Yes.
Okay, that's really helpful. Because I was reading an article on The Guardian, but this is about an American dad who, he says he and his wife raised his son to be, pretty liberal. They went to marches, they marched against Halliburton and Dick Cheney, and their community was artists and teachers. This father's a teacher, but his son, he says, is sort of on the upper end of the autism spectrum and was having trouble finding his group. And he got into a group of kids who were like hackers, and then they got on the dark web, and then he found these organizations, and they taught him how to be a man, and they taught him how to be a true patriot. And the father, is writing this op-ed saying, I can't figure out how to get my son back. He's in his early 20s and we barely speak. And I love him and I want to talk to him, but I can't change his mind and he doesn't know what to do. Do you have any thoughts for somebody in that kind of position? Maybe if you're there, and again, how you can turn your kid off of the track from going there.
If they're already there, I think that relational dialogue is the way to go about it, using that
Hmm.
type of thing. With my family, the reason why I wasn't completely ostracized, I mean, I was for a little while, a while, way back when that stuff happened with my mom's career, but they didn't cut me out of their life. The way that they just did it was because, especially when you're new in this stuff, you want to propagandize everybody. You want to recruit everybody. I'm trying to recruit my parents, like ridiculous stuff like that. And they're like, you know what? We can't be a family if you talk about this stuff, like we
Hmm.
can't. So we just all agreed not to talk politics, and that's how we held it together. So I would advise like a father in that situation to avoid that conversation, avoid those conversations about politics, but then from the offset, to try to repair that relationship, to try to bring him back into the family and say, let's get together for dinner. We won't talk about politics. We won't talk about any of that stuff. But then later, add relational dialogue to it. Start asking
Hmm.
gentle questions, and reframing things, and try to get him to think. And I've had some experience with autism and autistic folks, and that does add a different dimension to it. And in the movement, they're cognizant of this stuff now, and they actually have a term for it, because they target autistic folks, especially the ones that are on the higher on the spectrum, like your
Hmm.
Asperger's and those,
Right.
because they call it weaponized autism. They actually have a term for it. They
Wow.
call it weaponized autism, because they will take the autistics and have them working in sections like whatever they're really good at, like computers or
Right.
things like that. And some of those guys are like ultra intelligent, and thrive in those scenarios. Like there was one where they were using one example I can think of. I mean, that was a few examples, but one was they were having autistic people identify some of the Antifa types that were masking up and attacking people at events and stuff. And I remember
Hmm.
seeing this online and looking at the pictures, and it was an autistic guy that was figuring this stuff out. And he goes, "This is how I figured it out." And he goes, "You see the ring that this guy's wearing?" He goes,
Wow.
yes, like zoomed in on the ring,
Wow.
found the guy later in another frame at a different rally or something, and goes, "Same ring. That's him."
That's like some Monk stuff. I'm
Yeah.
rewatching Monk now on Netflix because I love it so much. And that is wow. Wow.
like
Okay.
like the like
Hmm.
army intelligence or the CIA or something,
For
could
sure. For
put this
sure.
guy
It's like, can we get this guy, please?
right.
Wow. Well, Jeff, I'm so grateful for your time, and I really am glad that you've spent so much time talking with us. But I do have one more question. And we did talk about we have kids. So how are you raising your kids? What strategies are you using so that your kids take a different path than the one you took?
Well, my kids are all grown, so yeah,
Really?
oh
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
I'm sorry. I've got little ones, so I think everybody is struggling in like diapers and potty training, but fine.
Right. Yeah. Mine are all, I had them very young, so mine are all grown up and all off on their own and everything now. But
Mhm.
thank goodness they never got active in the movement and things like that. So I kind of, they knew who, I was involved in it and all that, but it
Mhm.
wasn't something, obviously, because it was our whole world, but it wasn't something that was pushed on them in the home or anything like that. And since I've been doing the work that I was doing now, because even they had some of the kids had friends that weren't white. And there
Yeah.
was one girl that had contacted me, a lady now, but she was a girl when I knew her at the time. And she had said, she goes, I always knew you'd leave the movement. And she just one day just like messaged me on social media. And she goes, I don't know if you remember me, but I was one of your daughter's friends and I was over at the house and I knew that you would leave someday. And I'm really it's really awesome to see. And she had said that I guess she was sick one night when she was staying over at our house, and I offered to bring her to the doctors or help her get home or something like that. And that I didn't really remember it, but she had remembered it very well and explained the whole thing, and it was like, wow, how cool was that
She
to
remembered your active humanity.
yes, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Is there anything you want our listeners to know about Beyond Barriers, about the work that you do, or things that they could be doing?
Well, much like I think that with Beyond Barriers, we help people get out of extremist groups. We target all kinds of extremism, whether it's right, left, political, religious, gangs, cults. We work on help people get out of all of those and change their lives around. What I'm really passionate about is working in the educational sphere, like working with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Simon Wiesenthal Center, because I think education is the key. Like if I had had more experiences growing up, I might not have gotten involved in this stuff. Same for everybody else. I think the more experiences you have with different cultures and different people, you're less likely to be involved in that. And education is key. So I feel like educating our youth and educating our children is key. And anything that they can do to help facilitate that, I think is super important. So if anybody's struggling with any of those things, they could reach out to us. We're happy to help and any way we can. And just want to do good in the world. And I think the best advice I can give or like an action point for everybody is challenge yourself and have a conversation with somebody that's like, say, especially if you're like really into the politics, have a conversation
Mhm.
with somebody that's on the other side, not somebody that's going to be nasty, if they're nasty and stuff like that to you, then it's not worth your time. But if they're willing to sit down and talk, have a conversation and just see if you can find commonalities or see challenge yourself. And I think that's a good action point or something that anybody and everybody can do.
Mhm.
And if you're unwilling to do that, then you need to do a little bit more self work, and that's coming from somebody who's done a lot of self work. So
Okay, okay, I love it. He's calling us out. Okay, we've got to get out of our echo chambers. We need to listen to somebody else and see if we can engage in that relational dialogue, but also maybe they're engaging with relational dialogue to us. So really got to be open to both ways, right?
yeah.
Well, thank you so much, really, Jeff, for your time. Jeff sent me a lot of great links that I'm going to put in the show notes, and you're going to send me that curriculum too, right?
Yes.
Because I think that's going to be really helpful both for teachers and parents. It is surprising to see how much our young boys are under attack by all of these different extreme organizations that are trying to redefine for them what it is to be a man, what it is to be a patriot, what it is to be strong. And we as parents and educators really have to be at the forefront of showing our kids a way to be great, to be successful without having to step on other folks.
Well stated, Mijan. And thank you so much for having me on the program. And your work is inspiring. And please keep going and doing good in the world.
Ah, thank you so much. I will try, and I know you will too. Raise kids who love themselves and diversity. Follow us at Jumbo Books on all your favorite social media channels. And check out our website at www.jombobooks.com.